Everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome to something that is going to be very, very special indeed. And I'm talking about a book that people, even if they haven't read, they already seem to know about, and they are curious and they're wanting something. And I think this book is going to deliver, and in a big way. And we'll take you through it. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on the book as well, which I found really interesting as I was racing through it and then stopping and starting and going back and moving forward. It is a book that you're going to take a bit of time reading. But I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming along, for joining us. And Nikki and I are absolutely delighted to have you here. And of course, the evening is hosted by Exclusive Books and also, of course, by Penguin Books. So thank you, both of you, for providing the platform. And do keep in mind that Future Proof Yourself is available from all Exclusive bookstores. And of course, you can order on the web. And if you are really greedy, you can go online to Uber Eats. And at the same time, you can order a copy of your book. And apparently, it just arrives about 40 minutes later, which I think sounds fantastic. So we'll be taking questions a little bit later on. So I hope you're going to leave you with lots and lots to take away from this. I'm Jenny Crwys-Williams. I love books. And more than I love books, I think, is I love delving into the mind of authors and the stories that they tell. So let's start off with an introduction to Nikki Bush. And some of you may not know a little bit of her history. And Nikki, I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going into everything. Suffice to say that in 2019, Nikki was the very first South African woman to be introduced into the Speakers Hall of Fame. And I just thought that was an interesting date because it was only 2 years after the murder of her husband. So what happened in the interim? Well, we're going to take you into that as well, because it's part of what she was writing about. Also, a founding member of the Professional Speakers Association. She's the author of 4 books as well, the mother of 2 boys. And Nikki and I met years ago when I was working on 702, and I heard stories about this go-getting woman who was an expert in children's toys, because I hate giving children toys that they're just going to break immediately. It's got to be a raison d'etre for the kids, in my opinion, and in Nikki's. So at the end of the year, I invited her along after we'd done the tech side with people like Aki Anastasio. And then came Nikki, and we met the other day, and she said, you know, I heard rumors about you, Jenny, that you'd throw people off your show if you thought they were boring. And I didn't say that I actually found her as opposed to her finding me. And I knew who she was. I thought she was terrific. And you can see she's still on air. It is a remarkable achievement, one way or the other. But Nikki, let's start the conversation because we're going to run out of time. Simon was murdered in 2017, and I'm fascinated by the context of this book. So in context, what happened to you physically over the next 18 months? And you did share it with me, but you don't go into it in any great depth. Talk to us about the weight and about what actually happened to you.
Sure, Jenny, putting me in the deep end. And so we were attacked in our home at 3:00 in the morning on the 18th of November 2017. 2 armed intruders came into our home, and I locked myself away in the bathroom while my husband faced the intruders, and he took a single shot to the heart. And so, in essence, what happened was that life was divided into 2 parts. In 6 very short minutes, our lives were changed forever. Life was divided into 2 parts, and it's before this and after this, and nothing would ever be the same again. And it threw me into, they talk about grief dashing you against the rocks. Mm-hmm. And yes, of course, we were going through huge grief, but I think it was a very traumatic grief because of the way in which, of course, we lost Si. And he and I had been together for 28 years. We'd been married for 26 of those years. We'd lived in the same home for 23 of those years. And of course, we have two gorgeous boys. And so I guess, he was the witness to my life for a very long time. 1,000 moments that I took for granted, mostly because I assumed there would be 1,000 more. And the way he went was sudden, it was brutal, and it really did take my breath away. And I have a talk called What If Happens that I share on a regular basis with many organizations and corporate audiences about the impact that this event had on my brain, my body, my finances, and my business stroke my brand. And I was saying to you just before we went on air, we were talking about books and reading, and I've always been an avid reader. And one of the things that happened with my brain is that it became ADD for the first time in my life, and I'm a very focused person. And I was literally suffering from ADD. My working memory, my short-term memory was shot to hell. I would have conversations with people, and I'd go to bed at night thinking, what an interesting conversation about X, but I couldn't remember who I had it with. Or what an interesting conversation with so-and-so. What the hell were we talking about? And that was really difficult when it came to my work, which is about standing up in front of audiences, whether it's behind a microphone on radio or in front of a camera on TV, or whether it's on a stage. And for a good 18 to 24 months after Simon's death, I had to warn my audiences that the chances of me actually losing my place in my flow of presenting was going to be very high. So they better be listening so they could actually tell me where I was if I should skip a beat. And on a mental level, with this ADD, I lost my love of reading. I could read books for work, interestingly, but I could not get into a novel. And even today, and we're nearly 4 years later, I still battle to read for pleasure. I stopped cooking for pleasure. There were things that really, the bottom fell out of a lot of stuff. And we had to rebuild our family, and we're still rebuilding our family because essentially in a situation like that, the picture of life as you know it is broken forever. And you cannot get that picture back. So it's a call to step out into a new adventure. And I have to say the first 9 months were kind of a bit of a blur. And I didn't even journal about my process because I wanted to be in my process.
I'm just going to interrupt you there. You describe the terrible trauma. You use those words in the book. But I want to take you to the mist outside Hilton. What did that teach you? You went to Hilton. You were en route to Hilton, and you'd already made a speech, and you decided to take a route where there was thick mist. You thought you were going to get to your B&B quickly, but there was a thick mist, and you couldn't see what was happening. Take us through that.
Yes, so that was literally about 5 days before hard lockdown with COVID. So while the book isn't about my husband's death and it's not about COVID, we pull both of those threads into the book. And 5 days before lockdown, I had a 4-day speaking roadshow in KZN. I spoke in Maritzburg on a Thursday night, and I had to drive up to Hilton to my B&B. And I did what anybody does. I punched the address into Waze. And I didn't query Waze as to which route it was sending me. And about 10 minutes into my journey at 8:45 at night, I'm driving up the hill towards Hilton, and it's taking me along the old road. And I drive into this bank of mist that is so thick that I cannot see the front of my vehicle. And being a Joburg girl and not having been in that part of the country for a while, it just I thought I can't continue. So I pulled over, and about a minute later, somebody stopped in front of me, put their hazards on, and came to my window. And it just happened to be the organizer of the event in Maritzburg. And she said, "Nikki, I never travel this road at night because I know about the mist. I travel on the motorway." And in fact, those ladies are actually in the audience here this evening. And she offered to be my guide home that night. And as I'm following her at 20 kilometers an hour up the hill, hardly able to see her taillights, I just started to sob, and it was just great racking sobs as the this thing was triggered through my core of fear, not being able to see the future, feeling out of control. And I think most people who are on this call tonight can identify with those feelings because we've all felt them with COVID. And they were the very same feelings that I felt when I was locked in the bathroom while we were under siege, where I couldn't see what was going on outside the bathroom door. I didn't know how many intruders. I didn't know what they were doing to my son. I didn't know what they were doing to my husband. I hadn't heard a shot. And I didn't know how we were going to get out of this and what it was going to be like. So that journey through the mist was like me being locked behind the door. And I think it's like for everybody right now, we still can't see through the mist to the other side of COVID either. And so while Waze and Google Maps can help us when we try and get from A to B, they certainly haven't been of much use to us during COVID, and they certainly weren't of use to me when I was locked inside the bathroom.
So somebody said something to you that actually is the underlying theme of the book and of how to survive, if you can, absolute traumatic events. And it was all to do with punctuation. It
was. And Mary Lee van Niekerk is actually here this evening with us. And I do acknowledge her in the acknowledgements of the book. Because on the night of Simon's funeral, we held a wake for friends and family. And at about 10 o'clock that night, people started to leave. And it was at that time that I started to cry. And the previous week, I hadn't cried a huge amount because I think I'd just been in so much shock. And you do what you do. You know, when someone dies, there's a set thing that happens. You know, you've got to do this and then you've got to do that. And you lead up to the memorial or the funeral. And so there's kind of a well-trod pathway. And then I got to 10 o'clock at night and everyone's leaving. And the reality of my situation really dawned on me that the next day was a Sunday. And I actually had no idea what Sunday looked like. And for me, I'm one of those people who's a visionary and I like to see down the track for a couple of years, not just a couple of days. And I realized that all our hopes and dreams as a couple, as a family, were completely obliterated. They didn't exist anymore. And it was at that time that Mary Lee was standing next to me. Now, she's a good friend and an old varsity mate of size, and she's also a psychologist. And she said, "Nix, what's going on for you right now?" And I just said, you know, this feels like the end of everything I know. This feels like a full stop in my life. And she just said, "Can I encourage you to try and turn this full stop into a comma, into a pause in your life? It's not the end of your life. It's a pause in your life." And that wasn't all. She said, it's a comma and dot, dot, dot. And the dots are the future that you are going to create for yourself. And I don't know if she realized how important this analogy was going to become. And in fact, it's become the framework for me for getting up again, for discovering the adventure in the ashes. Because I think it's so easy to become a victim of the circumstance. And, you know, for 2.5 years, it was really, really hard. And I cried an enormous amount. And I didn't know what my name was, let alone the day of the week for most of those days of the first 2 years. But you know what? Life goes on. You've got to get up, you've got to work, you've got to earn a living. I was a sole breadwinner, a single mother all of a sudden. And what was so interesting about that analogy were the dots. The first thing is to say, well, this isn't the end of my life. This is the end of a chapter and it's the beginning of something else. But the dots, she was charging me with taking responsibility for building a new future. And there's a quote from The Gift, from Edith Eger. who's the Holocaust survivor. And she talks about how if somebody throws you a life raft, you need to hold on to it. You have to participate in your own rescue. And if you don't participate in your own rescue, then you get stuck and you get buried as a victim. And it's really hard then because you're in fight or flight or freeze and you literally get buried. And that can be the end of your life. And I guess I was so determined this wasn't going to be the end of my life, but it was merely charging me with taking responsibility. Sometimes we try and fix people. We try and save people. But if they don't want to be saved, and if they don't participate in their own rescue, you actually can't help them. It's a choice. Somewhere along the line, we do make a choice about whether to be broken open or whether to be broken by circumstances.
Can you trace the moment you actually, was it a moment where you actually said, okay, I'm going to go along with those ellipses, this is the future of my life? Can you take us to that moment, if you can remember it?
Yeah, I think it was about 9 months later, pretty much this time, in 2018, when I was actually invited to do a Women's Day event for an estate agency. And they asked me to talk about the 6 minutes that changed my life. And it was probably the most disturbing thing that I did after Simon's death, was to try and take a very messy, non-linear event and try and package it into a linear presentation. It was so difficult that 1 hour presentation became a 2-hour presentation because I didn't have the mental capacity to actually cull it down. And I had this most patient audience. So it was at that time when I was putting together this presentation that I got really angry. And I was sitting in bed one Sunday morning and I just went, there's so much damage. I don't know what I'm going to talk to this audience about that can help them. You know, the collateral damage here is so huge. And I folded a piece of paper in half lengthways. And on the left-hand side, I wrote collateral damage. And on the right-hand side, I wrote collateral beauty. And I started on the left-hand side because that was the frame of mind I was in at the time. And I literally did stream of consciousness writing, anything I could think of that was negative that had happened to us. So firstly, I'd lost my husband. Secondly, my children had lost their father. The third thing I wrote down was that I'd lost the future co-grandparent of my future grandchildren. The fourth thing was that we'd lost our home of 23 years, because my youngest son could never sleep in our home again. And so we really were refugees in our own lives. And I carried on writing every single negative thing, whether it was an emotion, whether it was somebody who'd walked into our lives and dumped all their stuff on us, as people do. You know, when you lose somebody, their losses are triggered as well. All the frightful stuff I had to go through in wrapping up my husband's life, his affairs. It's not a friendly journey. It's a bureaucratic nightmare. And so I wrote and I wrote and I wrote for about 2.5 pages. Got to the end of everything I could write. And then I thought, well, I better start on the collateral beauty, because there are at least 10 things I can write down.
So that's what you were able to trace it to.
Yes. And I wrote 5 pages, Jenny, 5 pages of beauty versus 2.5 pages of damage. And so windows and doors and possibilities and opportunities started opening up, and they are there if we can see them. And I was in a really bad place when I was writing this list. I really was. But it shifted my perspective. So it's an exercise in perspective that you can do for COVID. You can write this down for COVID. I've done it for COVID. Every audience that I speak to, I share this exercise, because if we can regain perspective, we can reframe and reauthor our lives and not be defined by the circumstances of our lives. And that's what's really important.
So this book is really all about disruption, but there are two kinds of disruption that, for me, runs through this book. One of the disruptions, obviously, is the tragic loss of Si, but the other one is COVID, and it changed all of our lives. There isn't a single person in this audience that who hasn't gone through disruption and who didn't experience it in radically different ways. And I'm fascinated by this theme that runs through the book. It's COVID, it's the pandemic, it's disruption on top of disruption. It is the most extraordinary time to be alive. The fact is that we are all still alive and learning to cope one way or the other. And this is what the book emphasizes. And you emphasize, Nikki, as well, how our futures, our joint futures, as well as individual, have radically changed, particularly if we are working from home and we've got children. Take us a little bit through that thinking.
Well, that's I have a smile on my face here because here I wear the parenting hat. And, I was just very uniquely positioned at the beginning of lockdown because I wear three distinctly different hats. And the one is the human potential and parenting expert. The second is that I've built a business and a brand from home for 25 years with children at various ages and stages. And the third was that, of course, I am someone who has walked the path of trauma, loss, and grief. So I completely could tune into where everybody was at. And in my reframing disruption presentation, which has probably been the most popular presentation in the last 18 months, the final section is called the COVID parenting paradox. And it's called that because for the last 15 years, every audience I've ever spoken to with parents in it, the parents come to me at the end and they say, our biggest wish is to have more quality time with our children. And then by some bizarre twist of fate, parents have been given their children 24/7 and they can all come back to me and they say, now what must we do? So people were quite unprepared for that. But what it points to, Jenny, is this whole mystery of work-life balance that we've always been striving after. And there is no such thing as work-life balance. I have always said, death to supermom, death to superdad, it doesn't exist. And we need to see life as a seesaw. And as long as our seesaw is in dynamic balance, we're okay. If it gets stuck here or stuck there, we're in deep trouble. But the fact is, life does not unfold in a straight line, and every day is going to be different, especially if you have children, because they're not robots. So we have to look at renaming dynamic balance, work-life balance, as work-life integration. And this is the first time for most people who have not built businesses from home, so people who've been in corporate offices, who have actually had the opportunity to see their children in action throughout the day, not just at the beginning and the end of the day. And in fact, some of the corporate excos that I'm working with, the exco members say that this is the first time in their parenting journey that they've had this experience, and they wouldn't swap it for the world because they've actually seen their children's lives in action, not just planting a kiss on their foreheads as they say goodnight to them. So it's been challenging.
I've got to interrupt you there because there is part of your book which I mean, it's all about getting back on your feet and following the ellipsis, where a woman, I think, on the garden route who had a B&B, and suddenly with COVID, she had no business. She had nothing. She had empty beds and echoes in her house. And then she decided after a month or so, damn it, she was going to actually open, and she was going to let her rooms to fathers and stroke businessmen who were working from home and had to have a bit of quiet. And so they were able to rent a room there. And I just thought the question that you were asked a short while ago, and the assumption was that things would go back to normal. There is no future. There is nothing that is going to be normal again. We are making it up as we go along. And this is part of the excitement of your book, but also the reassurance. So before we go on to something else, I want to talk about regaining control. Because for you, I mean, your journey was about regaining control. And I mean, you do gloss over how hard it was. But it is somehow getting your life back in some kind of semblance of order, and that comes with control. You've got 7 steps. What are they?
Oh, goodness, Jenny, now you're testing my memory. So, yes, I think, the whole reason why we are feeling so uncomfortable right now in COVID is because we've lost control. Whether you've lost a person or a colleague, and my condolences to everybody on this webinar if you have, that's a big thing. But for all of us, it's been a huge thing to lose control. And so we start regaining control in little ways. It starts with things like a routine. And when the world goes to hell, to bring back a regular wake-up time and a regular go-to-sleep time is a big thing. Now, I landed up taking sleeping tablets for nearly 2 years because I couldn't fall asleep. My brain was in overdrive, and I'd never been a sleeping tablet kind of a girl. And that was a big thing. Antidepressants, big thing for me. And so sometimes you have to do those things just to survive. Things like exercise, huge. Eating properly, a big thing. Clearing your clutter.
Is that because at a certain time in the day you have to get your food sorted out? Is that part of the, in other words, there's a pattern to your day?
Yes, it's the routine. The routine for me is not so much about the time. It's about the order and the sequence of the day. Because if you think in parenting terms, children need a routine for sanity, and they feel safer when they actually have a routine because it's predictable. Now, when your life is blown up, nothing is predictable. And that's what makes you feel like, what day of the week is this? What time of the day is this? Because you're not sleeping properly, you're not eating properly, you've lost your rhythm. And so we need to get back to rhythm. And one of the things that's interesting to talk about is the role of work in getting back to some form of sanity.
Even though you're at home.
Even though you're at home. And work, and I say this to my audiences all the time, if you have a job and if you're part of a team, celebrate that right now. Celebrate it, because we love to belong. This feeling of togetherness and belonging is a huge, huge driver of human nature. So is the need for attention, affirmation, and acknowledgement. So is the sense of needing to master things. And right now, we've actually had a huge learning curve, a steep learning curve for the last 18 months, all learning new skills, new ways to do business online, new ways to present if you're a presenter, new ways to lead if you lead a team. It's been a huge learning curve, but that feeds into the human desire for mastery and needing to learn new things. So let's pat ourselves on the back, because it's not all been bad. And if you go and do the collateral damage, collateral beauty exercise, these are the things that you need to go and write down on the beauty side of things, is every little thing that you've learned. And keeping that perspective that while it's been hard, it's also pushed you out of your comfort zone, and it's making you more resilient every single day. And so you don't get good at working from home overnight. You do have to sharpen your saw, and you get better and better at it. And you learn that if you've got children, you have to do deep work in the morning when they're asleep, before they wake up, and at night while they are still, when they've gone to bed. And that's what any entrepreneur who's built a business from home has done. Jenny, you've built a business from home most of your life. When you've not been in the studio, you've been at home. So you know what it's like to be a working mum who's had children, and children are busy and they run interference, and that is normal. And in fact, this book started as a white paper, and the white paper came out in April last year and went viral because it was how to keep your business running and mitigate the biggest risk to your business at that time, which was the working parent whose attention was split. And one of the things that you really have to do if you're at home with kids, and if you're running a team that's got parents who've got children at home, is you've really got to know your team. You've got to know who's in your team. You've got to know how many children they have. You've got to know what ages they are, because the age and stage of children will determine how much attention they need from their parents. What kind of support does each person have for their parenting journey while they're working from home? Because this is important to know. Otherwise, if they have no support, you can't lump them with new work because you think they're not commuting now. They've got an extra 2 hours. So actually, this whole new normal is forcing us to get to know each other better, to communicate in a much deeper way. I call it being a journeyman. We don't journey through life alone. Whether you're journeying with your friends or whether you're journeying with your colleagues at work, we really are now having to help each other. And that's through, firstly, self-leadership, because you can't be micromanaged anymore in a virtual space. And we also need to support each other. People need the sense that they're not in a vacuum.
So Nikki, I mean, I think one of the big lessons about working from home and being professional about it is actually to get up and get dressed. Because
Yes.
if you do everything from bed and you're pretending and whatever, and you're in your PJs and you haven't done your teeth, you actually cannot concentrate. And I think that that's also one of the lessons that you've given. So this whole, and Nikki, I read the book very quickly, and then I sat down and I read it slowly because I knew we were going to be having a conversation, which I think could last 2 hours quite happily. And this is what my book looked like. I wonder if you can see this at the end.
I love it. I love it.
And so, I mean, I color coded it. And in the end, when I got to page, I don't know, whatever the page was, I just thought, to hell with it. I'm just going to actually just go for it because it is absorbing. And anybody getting this book and buying it, which I hope lots of you are going to do exactly that, don't try and whip through this book. You're going to need to take time because you've got to absorb what the lessons are. So with every chapter, there is a work situation, you sum it up, and there is a home situation. And that actually, I think, is the backbone of the book because everybody is either working or they're at home or they're doing both. And so I think the structure of the book was lovely, and it helps to clarify every chapter, even the very short chapters. I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Was that your idea, Nikki? Just to sum up.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, Jenny. I'd started blogging in that style where the first sort of 1,000 words of the blog was in linear writing style. And then I would, at the end of my blog, have takeaways for winning at work and then takeaways for winning at home and life in bullet points. Mm. And when I started writing the book, and you speak to your managing editor, and we started talking about the fact that people are battling to read books because of COVID and attention spans being short, like I was talking about ADD, and I needed to write it in a way that was easy to access for time-starved, busy people. And so really the way I've written it is that if you just read that first section on dancing with disruption thoroughly, there are 5 sections to the book. If you read Dancing with Disruption thoroughly, which is only 46 pages or so, then you can actually dip into the other sections. So we've got remote working. So working remotely is part 2. Part 3 is building your resilience. Part 4 is leading yourself. And the book really is about self-leadership. And part 5 is leading your team at work and home. And within those sections, there are lots of very, very short chapters. So in a way, it's a bit of a chicken soup for the soul, because if you wanted to read something about resilience, you could go straight to part 3 and pick a chapter and not have to read the whole book, and it would still make sense. And that's really the style I wanted to achieve, that you could sit down and read one chapter for inspiration and feel uplifted.
So right at the very beginning of the book, you asked people to answer a whole set of questions. And I thought, oh, no, I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do it, but I did it. And then right at the end of the book, you asked people, have their perceptions changed? And I thought that was also very encouraging, because some of the people who are listening to you, some of the people who are going to buy this book, they are struggling, and people are struggling. We've lost God knows how many people and friends we have lost. Our lives have been turned upside down. And yet somehow or other, we're beginning to break the surface and we're beginning to be able to breathe again. And I just found that really, really fascinating.
Jenny, it's really interesting that you picked that up, because that's actually a mirror of what I do with my audiences online, because of course I have to present online all the time. How do you test the emotional temperature of a virtual audience? And I had to come up with a solution for that. And my solution was to run anonymous audience polls, which I do whether my audiences have 30 people in them or 6,000 people in them. I have a beginning poll and an end poll. And it's really nice to see how the audience shifts in the hour. And so, yes, I ask you as an audience, and as I do in the book, are you feeling fearful and depressed? And you've got to pick one statement that most accurately reflects how you're feeling in this minute, not a week ago or 6 months ago or a year ago. Fearful and depressed, anxious and overwhelmed, reasonably in control, or are you positive and optimistic about the future? And right now, there's a question I often ask my audiences: are you feeling fatigued and depleted? And gee, it's like over the top. And generally, I have 3 statements, and the audience is split in the first poll, a third, a third, a third. By the time I get to the end of my presentation and they've heard a bit of my story and seen some frameworks and I've given them some tools, then we run the same poll again. And it's phenomenal to hear what can happen, to see what can happen to an audience, whether you read a book or whether you sit through a presentation, to see how the emotional dial can shift. And we usually get to a place where 80 to 90% of the audience is sitting, feeling positive and optimistic about future possibilities. And it completely blows your mind because so many of them were in the negative space beforehand. So I think what that says to me is that if you choose to show up, if you choose to pitch up, if you choose to participate in your own rescue, things will change for you.
They can't help but change, actually. And there's the most wonderful quote in the book, other than the comma, the full stop and the comma and the ellipsis. And it was psychologist Susan David. And it comes towards the end of the book. And she says, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear walking. And I keep going back to you in the bathroom, locked in the bathroom on that terrible night, and having to open that door and having to go out and finding out what had actually happened. So the courage that I think that must have taken you, I think must have been absolutely phenomenal. But for anyone listening, you'll find that in this book. And courage is not the absence of fear, because that would be folly, of course. Courage is fear walking. And I think we should sometimes put it up on our fridge. I quite like things on fridges. So I think that's a useful thing to have. And Nikki, I think anybody buying this book, I think the chapter headings, are you really listening? Get that happy juice flowing. This is right towards the end of the book where you've gone through a lot. But what I love is going to the end of the book before I start reading. So I kind of know what I'm going to get because you've got so many links, you've got so many readings, so many books that you can read after this. So you can go and you can see some of the things that inspired you, and you can become inspired by them as well. So it is fantastic reading, and also explanations for the book. How long did it take you to write?
I signed the contract in May, and I knew that I was not going to touch this book until December. I had to hand in the manuscript at the end of January, and I started writing the book on about the 10th of, no, I started writing it on holiday, but in earnest on about the 10th of January. And I have to tell you that this book's quite a miracle that it's here, because my computer never got switched off for the 4 weeks that it, because I had to hand it in by the end of Jan. So call it a month. I wrote it in a month. And I never switched off my computer because I knew I had a problem. My computer was battling to start. This computer never got shut. And there was a moment in February after the manuscript was handed in where I woke up in the morning and I went, I have to make sure that I can access everything if my computer crashes. And by 12 o'clock that afternoon, my computer crashed and has never regained consciousness. And I just went, oh, thank goodness that book was gone. So yes, it was a very intense January. And of course, as you know, the book comes backwards and forwards between proofreaders and editors. And so it was a very intense 3 months till the end of March.
So with a large audience listening to you and going to be bigger and bigger and bigger, and as the book sells and sells and sells, which it is going to do, Nikki, what do you want people to get out of it?
I hope that people are going to be inspired and lifted up, and that they believe that they can. You know, we all need to get to a point where we choose, where you believe you can. And my encouragement for people is that, for me, there's a lot of fear involved in disruption, you know, whether it be internal disruption by choice, for maybe even positive reasons, like choosing a new job, going to a new town, moving house, moving country, maybe choosing to get divorced, maybe not choosing to get divorced, but somebody divorces you. You know, these are all disruptive moments in life. It doesn't have to be COVID. It doesn't have to be a death. It can be all sorts of things. And just to acknowledge the grief loss cycle that actually is inherent in all change and disruption. If you can see it, you can own it, and you can find your place in it. And my overriding message throughout the book is this: may your curiosity be stronger than your fear. May your curiosity be stronger than your fear, because I believe that the curiosity about the journey ahead, the mist you cannot yet see through, it's being curious about, I wonder what it might be like on the other side. That's that sense of curiosity that I really try and help my audiences to embrace, even though they can't see the future, because that's that, I'm not sure, but I will make it work. One way or another, I'll dance with it. And I think that's why that first section is called Dancing with Disruption. Is sometimes it's a fast foxtrot, and sometimes it's a slow waltz, and sometimes it's a dynamic tango. There are steps we have to learn as the future unveils itself, reveals itself, and we can't control that. And I think that that's probably the biggest lesson I learned through my husband's death, is that control is an illusion. It really is. We think we're in control, and we want to be in control. And when all control is taken away from you, I think that is when you really get to know yourself, and when you really get to see how resilient you really are. So that's an important part for me. You know, Anais Nin says, life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. But I say life shrinks or expands in proportion to our courage and our curiosity.
So, well, listen, Nikki, you've written a bestseller book, and I haven't had any questions. I've got lots of, say that again, please. And this is wonderful. So we've got a few minutes for questions. So if you want to ask a couple of questions, now's your chance. And if not, we can go, Nikki and I can actually go on talking for a long, long time, and go down all sorts of alleyways. But if you've got some questions, or if you've got some comments, and I can read them out, and whatever. I saw Eleanor Mary Cadell saying something lovely, and Alison, so many quotable quotes. And yes, they are. The book is full of quotable quotes. But actually what it is we are in a war at the moment, actually, and we can't see the end of it. And we've got to address things in a different way. And that's what we've got to do. It's just been handed down to us one way or the other. I keep thinking of our parents and grandparents in World War II and what they had to do to survive. And I think that's what we are doing. I mean, Adele Durant is just so proud of my friend, and lots of other, Claudia Kutsia, to everyone. Nikki, this has been pivotal. Well, that is wonderful. Mary Lou Neal, I think it is. Well, I can't remember that. It's just gone off the screen, but we love something. A beautiful book launch, Nikki. That comes from Yoki, I think it is. And I mean, this can go on forever, from Leanne Hodson to everyone. Please go on talking. It's so great. Well, we will, you know, but we just need another event, because Zoom is going to cut us off. Eleanor Mary says, I love the idea that curiosity can give you something that is special. Pam, lovely launch. Jill applauds the courage. I'm so proud of you, Nikki. From Helen, I will remember whatever the comment was. They said, thank you very much for that.
Going very fast here.
Yes, exactly. Just absolutely brilliant and inspirational. And I think that as we have to draw, opposed to this one way or another. I think that what I hope you get out of it is some of the richness and also some of the comfort that I got out of this, because you're not on your own. And I think, Nikki, that's also something that you talk about. Just the sense of loneliness that we have during that terrible 3-month lockdown, where the streets, you could look out of the window and the streets echoed. There was nothing. Dogs were imprisoned and whatever. But with all of this, you are not on your own. You need friends that you can pick up the phone to, and they will do the same to you. So it is the common cause, isn't it?
Yes, I think we just have to remember that we don't travel this life alone. We were not meant to be alone. And this is a time to be connecting. Even if you can only connect online. And if you can see people one-on-one, and Jenny, you and I saw each other for the first time in about 2 years, and we chatted for 3 hours the other day. And, it's just so wonderful. I think you get a real appreciation of the depth of long relationships. So really value and celebrate those long relationships, but don't be afraid to strike up new relationships with people and create new networks. I just find that at the moment, when I speak to clients, we go deep quickly because everybody is sharing their humanity and their vulnerability. We are losing this thing of it's not okay to show emotion. Actually, everybody is going through tough stuff. And so there's not so much a meeting of the heads anymore on its own, but the heads and the hearts at the same time. And I, for one, think that is long overdue. And the pandemic has given us this window to really share not just our strengths, but our vulnerabilities too. And I think that was probably one of the amazing gifts that I experienced with the loss of my husband, was that everybody knew what I'd been through. I couldn't pretend that things were okay. They weren't. And so just to say to our audience that it's okay to feel what you feel with COVID. It's okay, but you've got to acknowledge what you feel, and you've got to talk about it, and you've got to deal with it, because one of the most damaging things you can do is shove your feelings under the rug, because they fester and they get more and more toxic, and they come out in more and more destructive ways. So I'm often asked by my audiences, what's the value in counseling or coaching? And I say, absolutely, I would not be here today doing the work I'm doing, being able to be in front of an audience, had I not actually said I can't cope. I'm not coping, and I need help. And I've had trauma counseling, I've had coaching, I've had therapy, I've had medication, I've had everything, alternative and otherwise. And it's okay. And just to say to everybody, don't suffer in silence. You've got to reach out, and you've got to acknowledge how you feel, and then you've got to participate in your own rescue. So just to remind everybody not to be imprisoned by the full stop. And it might not be COVID that is your full stop. When we talk about a comma full stop, many people in an audience come back to me and they say, that talk made me think of something that happened 18 years ago that kept me prisoner, and I didn't even know. And after your talk, I let it go. I cried for 8 hours. Thanks a lot for that. But it's turned into a comma, and I can move on. So if there is something that a gift maybe that can come through the reading of this book or attending any of my presentations, is maybe you'll stumble across something that's been holding you prisoner as a full stop, and you will be able to choose whether to turn it into a comma on your way rather than in your way.
Well, I have to say they're going to discover so much. There's the Pomodoro technique, which we have no time to discuss. Pomodoro means tomato. There is glitter. Watching glitter fall. I like those little globes that you shake and the snow
Yeah,
falls.
the snow globe.
I mean, with all of this, you're going to be on a wonderful journey of discovery. I promise all of you. Now, if you have only just tuned into this webinar, don't break down because it will be up on Exclusive Books on Facebook. So don't worry about that. And remember to get your copies of Future Proof Yourself from Exclusive Books, whichever way. You can even walk into their stores and buy it, by the way. And for more information, go to nikkibush.com. And Nikki, just incredibly briefly, because we are out of time, literally, they're going to cut us off. What are they going to get on your website?
So on my website, you will find my blog, which is quite prolific. What did Bruce Whitfield said? You're relentless, Nikki.
Yes.
So I do put up blogs every single week, and they do follow a similar formulation to the book. There is a podcast, so the Win at Work and Life with Nikki Bush podcast, where we have some really interesting guests. In fact, Jen, we'll have to have you on the podcast. And loads and loads of videos. There is a new short 3-minute start right video that goes out every single week with a little tip on how to win at work and life. And you will find that on Nikki Bush YouTube. And so I think those are really valuable at this time. And if you get onto my mailing list, you will get those tips every week on a Monday in your inbox. So
yes, but do you give makeup tips as well? Because, I mean, I'm just thinking of all the things I hated about lockdown. It was, this is how you put your lipstick on and whatever. And I thought, surely we've left that behind, but I don't think we have. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Exclusive Books. Thank you, Penguin. And most of all, thank you, Nikki Bush.
And to you, Jenny, thank you for stepping in and for anchoring this evening. You have been one of my heroes in the media, and you've just been right up there as one of the top journalists of the ilk. And I really mean it. I've been interviewed over 3,000 times in the media in the last 12 years or so. And there are some journalists who just stand head and shoulders above the rest. And you are one of them who will always be memorable. You have wit, you have humor, you ask insightful questions. And the thing is that I don't think you ever really interview people you're not interested in. So, or you don't talk about topics that you're not interested in. So I think you're always just so invested. And I think it's been a real treat. I see so many people in the chat who are saying, yes, Jenny, you do, with lots of O's. Jenny is a legend. She is. And watch the space, because she's also going through lots of reinvention and some really exciting stuff. And I look forward to seeing all of that happening in your life, Jen.
Nikki, thank you. I love the pink and I love the book. So thank you very much indeed.